Not about going to a Thai temple and creating a house that looks like a Thai temple. It's that when you go to a Thai temple, you recognize that there's a craft that modernism took away from you. How can you reinvent that craft? And Jain and people in India, they do it beautifully. They do a contemporary architecture. And I learned about scale. I learned about the right height to sit. I compared it to the modular. What is the measurement of your Buddhist faith? If you go to Sinan in Turkey, the measurement is from there to there. Don't just fall for this thing of the metric system has nothing to do with anything. I use feet and inches because it's more related to the human body. So find your own measurement in your society. And these Ndebele women, they knew composition, they knew proportion, they knew rhythm, they knew sense of material. Those are all things you need as the grammar to be able to talk architecture. And then computers is just another piece of grammar. Okay? And the cleanliness. Where does the cleanliness come from? Because Africans work in Calvinist homes, and Calvinists are clean, and they make you, as part of your religion, believe that being clean is what you do. So you affect other cultures. You've got a whole mixture of cultures here, but the beauty behind how you deal with the landscape and how you deal with water, it's all there. And then activism, cutting one's teeth. I was an Olympic athlete. I would have made 2 Olympic finals, but I supported the sports boycott, which was very effective, so I couldn't go to the Olympics. It made me realize there's some bigger commitment you had to make about something. It's not like today where it's all about me and self-entitlement. It was a bigger thing, and it was a wonderful thing. And I started doing projects. This was an African who wanted to do a shopping center up in the north of the country on land that it was unheard of. What apartheid did is it was a bit like what communism did to Eastern Europe. It denied Africans, as part of suppression, access to the free market system. You could borrow money to get a Mercedes-Benz, but not to become a businessman. And on this building is not about the building. It's about an 8-year process we went through. And because he had money to do this, the local community thought he was in cahoots with the government, and they wanted to burn it down. So how do you win the support of a community? And we suddenly realized that these people needed to become the partners in this. The taxi drivers were part of the political force. And it's not just letting them use your toilets and giving them water. This was at a time when if you traded like this, you were locked up in jail and beaten. And then the laws changed. We were part of that change. And a sister building to this, what happened is I went down the road and I started interacting with a wonderful sculptor, Jackson Hungwani. I documented his Acropolis, where he took an Iron Age settlement, 2,000 years old, and altered it to be beginning and end. There's Christ's office, there's the God's altar, Christ's altar, God's altars for the woman. I helped him erect an aerial because he believed that prayer is energy, and he didn't need a congregation. And he was a shaman in the true sense. He told me the day of Mandela's release 3 years before. He sculpted vultures because their tribe, when they don't know what the future holds, if you eat the heart of a vulture, you can see the future. And one of the vultures he's made only occurs in an Egyptian hieroglyph. How did he know that? So suddenly, metaphysically, you're working with forces. It's a bit like being a Latin American, where you're no longer a Roman Catholic. You've actually got the Incas, and you've got other generations that you connect with, and it enriches you. And then we started altering a house, and this is, Diana, my garden. It's a house and a garden, and it has to do with a hybrid architecture. And from my studies of African villages, I realized that to an African, to the Western mind, a house is an object. To an African, it's the umuzi. It's the entire area of the farm with the fences, with the cattle, with the backyard, with the graveyards, and then the labyrinth of home. Home is not perceived as an object. It's an obsession we have. And then I started realizing that if in the old driveway here, if I actually put a cottage and I put that there, you create a forecourt, an inner court, another court. You look at Japanese courtyards. You start defining outdoor space. And a house is not a home unless it's a village. I started coining that term. And I started looking at what incremental growth meant and how the house can become a village. And these thoughts that had come from here started transposing because they were part of my consciousness in 1978, 1982, before most of you were born. And then we started sculpting a hillside. There were already some ruins there from the 1980s, and so it's all about a garden and how South Africa has 10% of the world's plants. It has more plants than if you take Land's End and you take the whole of Europe, the whole of Russia, the whole of Asia. It has more plants because it's where life started. And we have diversity. You can go to two different valleys in Zululand and you can get a bigger genetic mix than you can get between you and a Norwegian. It's interesting. I find that interesting. And the bowl is from India. Okay? And I started working with stone, and we started getting plants from friends, and we started creating our own piece of paradise, okay, and extruding the landscape. And we have jacaranda trees. But why do we have jacaranda trees? Because the jacaranda trees came when the British came to steal our diamonds and gold. It came in the food on the boats for the horses. And then the plants grew, and we now have better jacarandas than Mexico because they permutate in that environment to become something else. So you suddenly realize we're part of this world. And I'm about the stones, and my wife is about the daisies floating in the Chinese bowl, which is possible. That's why we get on so well, because we're different people. Okay? And also, I like a house that is able to accommodate the autobiography of who the occupant is. I don't like houses that just have to have designer furniture. It's a little bit of an affront. A house is really good for me when it can have the designer furniture, but it can also have the baggage of someone else's life. Okay? And this is all about the birds fly through the house. It's about bringing the outside in. And then telling the stories of living cultures, cultural heritage and tourism, creating an authentic African architecture. What happened during apartheid, I did these almost undercover, risking being locked up by the security police because you were talking to an African. Okay? And then I started taking these settlements that I'd measured up. In Tswana culture, every family name has a circle like this. This is the place of the cattle. The entrance is over there. The chief is here. The growth is backwards. And I started realizing there were typologies. And then I started realizing this is a hotla. If you're in Latin America or in Mexico, it's a ramada. Here it's a hotla. It's a way of creating shade. And then I started realizing that if I got involved with people's lives and I went into their houses and I looked how they did their furniture and how they live, I would get a better understanding of people. Ordinary people, the other 96%. And how in the backyard of this particular house here, they've been influenced by Western, they've acquired, this is the symbolic house, where you live in the outdoor space and you take shelter there. But when you acquire Western furniture, you have to adapt to change. And the work I'll show you later on is first-generation Africans now, who in the space of time that's taken you 70 years, in 5 years, they're having to do what you did in 70 years and become urban. But they're first generation and they're traumatized by it. How do we deal with it? We go to Mexico. We go to other places to learn. Then we became a democracy, and I started being able to do legitimate work, interacting with, this is a place where you can go, and if you're a tourist to one of the game reserves, you can come out and you can meet people here, and in a dignified way, you can talk to them about their culture. They can have performance art. You can eat their food. And I started learning about, this is soil cement technology. And all of this is built by, the money was only given on condition that you use the local unemployed across gender and across age group. So suddenly a different way of contracting. And you're teaching people how to make things. I'd been to the Dogon in Mali, and I'd learned that where you're in a desert, you have short timbers from bushes, you can build a roof like that. So it's a transfer of technologies. And then these mamas here, they do wonderful dung painting on the walls with their fingers, but dung doesn't mix with cement, so we got some tinter. And what did we do? We had a beautiful outcome. And I'd take this man into the mountains, and I'd get 5 people to make piles of stone, And then I would actually say, okay, how long did that take? Now we have to hire the tractor from Mrs. Bafshu. How much does that cost? You have to teach him how to price what he's doing, not just how to do what he's doing. So you become a teacher, and it's very rewarding. And then you launch him as a contractor. So it's fascinating. And then this we built from scratch. We built it in 7 weeks. We trained these people who were unemployed in basic building techniques. And we built this little house, and it grew into being something that was very nice, that could grow like that. And then we went up to the north of the country where there were living cultures. And again, we had an interaction with, there were people from overseas who wanted reconstructions of a living culture with museum facilities so they could hear the chickens, they could live with the community, but they wanted a bathroom. Okay, so we took the conventional house and we did beautiful things. And I love these buildings because they're very modest. They're all made out of local materials and pivot doors, and they tell the story of pots, because when a woman is buried, she's buried in this position in a pot. So the pot is the carrier of life. The woman is the carrier of life. So there's these symbolisms. It takes you out of your Western mode back to beginnings. And community interaction. You take the model, you start. And sometimes you work for 2 years on this, and the service provider who's engaged you absconds with 700,000 rand and the project collapses. In fact, we're doing a book where we're telling the stories of community work, not the building, because it's very interesting. And then you do a lodge, which has to do with the bent quality. You find that the Afrikaners have set up an institution where you have African lawyers. We have 11 languages. You can get a community who doesn't know what a trust is, or they don't know what an NGO is, and he, in their own language, can tell them, because language is respect, can tell them what to do. And this is quite a beautiful project. The red is interior space, and I looked at the tree, and the tree became the support structure for the thatch, which is grass. And then we did this. What happened is they have a 51% ownership in the project, the community, set up through a trust, through proper training. And then you have an operator who's in New York and he can bring people here. And when people pay a lot of money to come and stay here, they're basically coming for seduction purposes, so you must make it special. And they've come from Holland or somewhere. They can stand naked and look at an elephant, whereas 24 hours ago they were in the snow in Europe, and they don't mind paying $2,000. It's fine. But what does it have to do? It has to do with rectilinear geometry. It has to do with composition. It has to do with an internal fire. It has to do with a sliding door, because there's evidence of 1,000 years ago of the people using sliding doors. And then another exploration in the same thing. And then you become more urban. What happened when we became a democracy in Johannesburg, it's very interesting. Africans were not allowed to occupy space or own land in the city, which was like an American city. It's like 130 years old. And when we became a democracy, they descended on the city, and what happened is the white people fled to build what the Americans call a boomberg, and they took the stock exchange with them. 3 kilometers away is this area, which is a little bit like Palestine. It's blocked off. It's apartheid, oldest township by industrial. So it has one point of entry, and a presidential program came to liberate it and turn it into a contemporary place. It had infrastructure for 77,000, but there's 600,000 people. So what do? You've got grey water and you've got waste being mixed. This is the building that's now will be finished by September. It's taken 15 years because it had 3 government agencies, and every time you got a new head, they didn't want to do what the old head did. But it's been a wonderful process. And what we did is, Mandela, when he left, having gone through the circumcision rites to become a man, when he left for the city, the first place he stayed was a room here. So we declared this a conservation area. And because it was Mandela, every time we went for money, we got money. And then we wanted to build a center. He said, I want you to tell the story of these people, and I don't just want you to tell the story of their struggle, I want you to tell the story of the good things, that the poets, the jazz musicians that have come out of it. Africans don't stay with the past, they move forward because the sun comes up like a new day. And what I did is I went into the community and I measured it up. You go in just with a measuring tape, and not an assistant, because you can get a little boy or a little girl to help you, or a granny, and then you get to know everyone. Now I go to all the weddings, the funerals. These are the buildings built after the world wars for ex-servicemen who were there, and this is how the people have made yards of 10 families on their own. They don't have no title to the land, and yet someone builds a 70 square meter house, which is better than most architects can do, and they put all their life savings in something that can be taken away from you. They're now getting transfer. But I learned so much about people by doing this. And then I look at defensible space, how you create those courtyards and verandas, and they become the things that ventilate. And then there's a bigger area. And then I compared, this is what the new government promised every man, 250 square meters with a house. And yet we have these other realities. And then what happened? This is a lovely story, and I put this down. There were some artists in the street opposite this building, and they had a marijuana problem. And I've got 3 sons. And those of you, men are like baboons until they're at least 30. I'm still a baboon. And what happened is they got weights when they were teenagers, and they thought that if they did this every day for 2 weeks, the next time they go with their mates for a beer, maybe a girl will look at them. Nothing happened. Okay? So they put the weights down and they went rusty. So I took the weights to the guys with marijuana, and they got their picture in the newspaper. And then Reg Parks, who trains Arnold Schwarzenegger, saw the picture, and he got Arnie to give them a gym. Now they don't smoke marijuana, but they have muscles that are bigger than my head, and they run this gym. So you see, it's a community interactive thing. Now what happens is I have Richard Branson wanting to see me to give them a new gym. So out of a little act, something wonderful can happen. And these are the courtyards. Good surveillance at the entrance. No grey water, a communal shared facility over here. And I'm trying to get, now that we got government, I'm trying to do lightweight structures on top here and use this as an example of how we can, through a green program, actually make this work much better. And then you look what ordinary people do. And you enter into their lives. I took Rajiv Kapalia, Doshi's son-in-law here, and he said, Peter, poverty is relative. These people have got TVs, they've got a stove, he's got a truck. By Indian standards, this is not poverty, but you need to understand the standard where you come from. And when I come home from a funeral, I find that they've closed off the street, and they've slaughtered an ox, and the person lies in state, and it's a mixture of Old Testament, New Testament, and their own beliefs. This is what we had to broker. These families were living here, all in shacks, none of them permanent houses. We had to get the authorities to give them an option of a better life in this township with their children, not to dump them outside the city 50 kilometers away, in order to build the center. When I first went into here, I counted 15 families. The 15 families became 72 families. It ended up being 35 families because it's political. You're getting given a house for nothing. Okay? What did we deal with? The public space is the street. Okay? There's no other public space. We're making public space here. We're making plazas. We're making a loggia. We're making commercial. We're making training facilities. We're making a restaurant. And when you come upstairs, Madiba, Nelson Mandela said, tell the story of the people. So I did a bridge building which deals with past, present, and future. We're busy interviewing next week people for the exhibition. And so you're working in an environment which is, it's not going to go away. We're going to get more and more people living like this. And because of our climate, people live like this. The people love the building. We had to involve the unemployed. So I built a steel structure, and then I let the poor people get trained how to enclose it. Okay, and then we've made the ramp and this the extension of the street, and then you come down, and then you go into the different yards. And the back facade you're dealing with people who are urban scavengers on the one hand, like the favelas, and then there are people that come from a rural area and they have a tradition of hand making. Okay, but this is your context. And then when you go through the museum, you become the actor for the, unwittingly, without realizing, you're learning about the community, but you become the actor for the community. And suddenly, we saw that in John Lynn's work this morning, that a staircase is an amphitheater. He uses it on roofs and things all the time. So you start thinking differently. You notice that the locals, they tend to extrude the pointing, and they paint it black. So I'm not doing this for the architectural magazine, I'm doing it for the people. And they like that. And they identify with it. Now, as I say, this building has been standing vacant for 5 years, not one brick's been taken, because the people have ownership over it. They were part of building it. It's not development aid where you just give, you make them part of it. And it's very important, the whole thing of empowerment. And this is community meetings that take place. We've got the tiling happening on these shops here. We've just finished the tiling here. Then what do? You run a program here. You run a program for artworks. You look at robust steel detailing. And then this is what the people do. They take the throwaway tiles of a developed society, because you've got to go to Santon, it's like Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles. It's no different. It's like a piece of America. And then I've just finished last week, while I'm here, my office went and we took all the granite offcuts from the kitchens and the bathrooms of the wealthy, and we make it into a wonderful way of becoming children again and playing. Now, children in an urbanizing world. When we ran a program, Kevin Lynch might mean something to some of you. He was a great American who did the image of the city, and he did children in the city. And he ran a program where he got from 8 to 14-year-olds, children to draw their environment, the positive and negative aspects, and make proposals for improvement. They're better than urban planners. And what we did is, when we became a democracy, Africans descended on the city because they thought if you occupied space that wasn't occupied, you would get housing. And so we went into this community, and I measured it up. I noticed the social structure of it. I noticed where the beer gardens were, and then these families that are in more detail. And most importantly, your researchers, you send them into this community for 24 hours so they can deal with body movements in a dignified way, because there are no toilets. So it makes you wake up as someone who's from a privileged situation as to how do people deal with that? And a lot of them are from rural situations, so a little bit of outdoor space is quite important. And then the buffers that you make and how you subdivide the space so that you can have privacy. And these are the measured drawings that came out of it. And these were the children's drawings that told you so much about how a girl is different from a boy. Boys tend to go, when they're told not to go somewhere, they venture far afield and do go there. Girls stay at home. You could see which children had problems with their parents through the drawings. And lo and behold, our new government did what the old government did. It moved in with the red ants and the dogs, packed these people up, and dumped them 50 kilometers outside the city in a government grid. And this is how you started. And then we documented it again. Then we used Norwegian children's money to build a childcare center with 3 shipping containers. And we tried to get every 5,000 families to have a child-owned facility. Because our mayor had signed the 1991 Children's Act in Istanbul. But what we were doing, we were making placemaking. We were also making a place where you could climb and you could go down. And the people loved this, okay? It had problems because we were beneficiating a community who has to wait. You get into a queue where you wait 5 years for upgrade. Now, this one was being upgraded before the next one, so it started like a gang warfare. But I don't want to get into that. What's important is I documented the same families, and I watched how they organized their life. Okay? And I also demonstrated that you can do higher density housing. In South Africa, we have this crazy obsession, because we inherited from apartheid, that you have 12.5 meters by 20 meters, when if you use, the rest of the world has 6 or 7 meters by 28 meters. Why don't we learn from the rest of the world? Now, human settlement in a changing world, from the home to the courtyard, the patio, to the compound, to the street, to the village, to the neighborhood, to the city. This is where we have a holiday house over here, and I designed a very nice house for a friend. It's this house, and I love this house because it's all the lessons I learned from my African studies. 3 detached pavilions with diagonal extensions, an inner court, a morning deck, an afternoon deck. You open the doors, the birds fly through. It's cold, you close the doors, you light the fire. You come back from the beach, it has the Khan thing of service and served spaces. Because it's built out of timber, we don't normally build out of timber. And it can take the furniture, the ordinary furniture that people who have a holiday home and they're middle class, they're not going to go and get designer furniture. They don't need it anyway. This is more comfortable usually. And they can make their own lifestyle. And then I had another chance where Africa puts its feet into the sea to design a house here. And I learned from the Japanese and from your culture the whole idea that you've got to capture a view alive. If you capture a view alive, we learn it from the Japanese and from the Asian cultures. You use the eaves, you use the deck. A captured view is in fact, an architectural intervention should make the view more significant than if it wasn't there. So we're looking and learning all the time. Schindler went as a European to America and discovered that through working through Frank Lloyd Wright, the whole Asian influence. And there it is. And it's a house that can only have 1 bedroom, but I sleep 11 people because you tuck the people in. Okay? And she's not someone who has particularly good taste, the client, but I sent her to Mali so she could get some Mali material. And the nice thing with the house is that when you have a view that you're looking down to, like if you take the floor horizontal, you block the view. So if you step the view down, you gesture to the view. So even in the dining room here, you can still see the view. And when you're in the bathroom and when you're in the bedroom, you can see the view. And then you make little pockets of space so that it can be homely and cozy. And we in South Africa, a little bit like Lino Babadi going to Brazil, we don't have IKEA, we don't have... So you make your own things. It's actually a much better situation to be in because you can't just walk down the road and get an alto chair or something. And then this is an experiment in modernism, which is very difficult. And it's a client who had a swimming pool in the corner of their garden. She has a lot of money. She entertains her friends. So I used it as a pretext for architectural promenade and the idea to explore African ideas of space making. And you realize suddenly when you have a section that's very small, the importance of that. It's the same lesson you learned from Greek architecture. That's why you look at it. And we wanted to do it. And then we did social housing. And we were the apartheid engineers put you into this grid. And I said to them, look, if you take the roads with the contours, you can save yourself $13 million. But they were crooks. They were making money out of this. But what we were doing, we were showing if you put a house near the boundary and you make it grow, you can make meaningful space. And it was one of the better housing schemes at the point in time. And then I got involved with this, but there's a mindset in South Africa that if you create high density for Africans, you'll create a slum. It's in the bureaucrat's mind, it's in the technocrat's mind. I don't have time for that, so I moved to housing in other parts of the world. And I went to Rwanda. I stopped teaching at undergraduate level in 2007, and I started practicing what I preach. And I was taken to Rwanda to be the leader of the team that would design the State House for His Excellency, the President. It's a classified project, so I can show you 1 or 2 images. And I said to Kagame, I said, I want to ask you what it means to be Rwandan. You have a unique landscape of volcanoes. These are not Rwandans, they're gorillas, but they bring a lot of tourism to you. You have wonderful water. You have wonderful